right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexel, coming to you with another This Legal Life, where I get to sit down with people around the legal industry and hear about their life. Today, I'm very, very excited to be speaking with Matt Schwartz. Matt is a partner at DLA Piper, as well as the U.S. Finance Practice Group leader. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
We've gotten the chance to connect a little bit before, and I think a lot of people probably know you as somebody who's on LinkedIn, a baseball guy, San Diego, and today we're going to sort of double click a little bit into your legal life. But before we sort of start out, I was looking through your LinkedIn before we got in, and I stopped at a post that had 42. And so I know that you are a big Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy person, right? And
Yep.
that post was especially interesting for me. Before we get into sort of your background, everybody knows how this podcast works, or some of the lessons that you've learned. What does the Hitchhiker's Guide Galaxy, if we just started with that blanket statement, what has Hitchhiker's Guide taught you about life and all of it? I've met so many people who love that movie, love that book, just sort of
Yeah.
the writing. What does it mean to you?
I think it's just about kind of the absurdity of life and how, the unexpected always happens. You should be prepared for the unexpected to happen. And really, it's a great question, because one of, I think, the biggest lessons to learn as both a lawyer and a human is to not panic and try to stay
Right.
calm.
Right.
There's this great, not to cross-contaminate my pop culture, but there is Ted Lasso is another one of my absolute favorites for totally different reasons. But there's this great scene in Ted Lasso when Roy says to Ted, "I can't control my emotions." And Ted says, "Well, by all means, let them control you."
Yeah,
I think that's really part of why people like Hitchhiker's Guide and other sort of literature in that vein. It's like, life is absurd, life is crazy. Don't panic, stay calm. Life's going to turn no matter what.
Yeah.
I think it's a great lesson for lawyers, because it is a panic-stricken type of industry, right?
Sure.
There are many landmines all day long in this industry. You never know what you're going to end up facing. And so I think having that sort of, a little bit silly but calm approach to life, really resonates with a lot of people who deal with, craziness in their professional and personal life.
Absolutely.
There.
So we're going to get to some of Matt's big takeaways in the last part of this, and I think one of them is going to be keep it silly but keep it serious. Life is absurd, but it'll keep on going on. So that might be one. We're going to get to a couple more, and then how you're thinking about sort of the future of the profession. But let's go back in our time machine, and let's go all the way back to 2001. Interesting year, for a very myriad of reasons, but not least of which is you graduated from law school and started your intro into the legal profession. You want to take us back to 2001 and talk about, what was going on from the perspective of how were you viewing sort of the next 20 years of your career? Why DLA? How are you thinking about your career in general? I know one of the big things that you're really into is mentoring and guidance. You're part of a board and have co-founded a couple companies, initiatives that really sort of support in terms of legal network. But take us all the way back there. Who were you? What was going on in your mind, and how were you thinking about things back then?
Yeah, I was fresh out of law school. I went kind of straight through college, law school. At the time, I joined a much smaller firm called Gray, Carey, Ware, and Friedenrich, which in 2005 became part of DLA Piper. That firm was heavily focused on technology, life sciences, and healthcare, including companies in that space, investors in that space, very California focused, but also in other markets, New York and DC, Seattle, Austin. So it was a heavy focus on technology. I really thought that was a great space to be in, which is why I chose the firm that I did, aside from wanting to, move to California and kind of live maybe a little bit of a healthier, beach-centric, weather-centric lifestyle.
Right.
I came out here and was working on all kinds of corporate and finance transactions across the industry, with a heavy focus on the technology industry and on life sciences and healthcare. At the time, I don't know that I had a grand plan other than, I was 25 and wanted to live in paradise and get good experience while doing it. So, I think my first few years, I was a sponge, basically. I soaked up every experience I could. I was just telling someone this the other day. You mentioned it, so I'll say it. There was very little work-life balance per se, right? And I still feel like that's a bit of a misnomer, which we can dive into.
Sure.
There are times in your career, especially your first, say, 5 years as an associate, where I firmly believe you got to throw yourself in all the way in if you want to really get good at doing whatever you're going to be doing as a lawyer. It's the same thing if you wanted to be a guitar player and play rock guitar in a band or drums or any other instrument, or get good at any other skill. It takes a solid 5 years of you really throwing yourself into it, spending a majority of your intellectual curiosity, professional time doing it. And so I really did that. I moved out here. Obviously, I had time to surf and hang out, but most of my time I was dedicated to being in this office, helping the lawyers that were here, learning about whatever I could, going to client events, traveling to meet clients, building relationships, writing articles, doing thought leadership. I don't think mentoring was then what it is now, and there weren't as many formal channels, but I was getting a lot of mentoring from the lawyers that I worked with, right? And so for me, when Greg Carey became part of DLA Piper back in 2005, I had sort of moved seats a little bit, but I ended up right back in the exact same place I had started, just part of this much larger enterprise, right? So that was definitely an inflection point for me, was going from being at, a 250, 300 person law firm to going to one of the largest law conglomerates in the world. That was happenstance, right? I didn't choose for that to happen. It just kind of did. But I think it was at a really good inflection point, right? Because I think just like where I was, 4 years into a career, 5 years into a career, that's when you're at a point when you start having options. You go, hey, do I want to stay at this firm or do I want to move somewhere? Do I want to specialize in my particular area of law, or do I want to continue to do more broad area? Do I want to go in-house and work at a company? You've got tons of options in that space. So I think I lived unintentionally a very similar experience to what many associates feel, is they go to a place, they dive in, they maybe work a ton of hours, they learn a lot. And then, 4 or 5 years into a career, they've got a decision to make. Do I want to stay here and do I want to make partner? Do I want to stay here and maybe not make partner and go some other path? Do I want to go to a smaller or bigger firm? Do I want to go in-house? It was at that point where I was like, no, I'm going to keep the train rolling and stay here and see how it goes, which I did. I stayed, and 5 years down the road, I made partner. And so then I had another inflection point, right? To decide is this the right place for me? Do I want to continue in the big law lifestyle? What type of work am I going to try to do? And that rolled for another 5 years or so, till I got to the point where I was offered a leadership role, running the leadership of the team in which I practiced. And I did that for another 5 or so years, of which 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was offered the leadership role of this much larger finance team. So I think that unintentionally, that sort of like rule of fives, where every 5 years you kind of reach an in your practice, I do think that holds true today. So, if that's for me, I'm at, 5.0 of my career right now, maybe about to enter 6.0.
That's right. Okay. So we'll get to 6.0. We'll get to I love the future part, of course. People who have listened to this podcast know I'm obsessed with the hero's journey, because the hero always comes back and starts another journey, which is the next part. So I'm excited about your next part of the journey. Let me ask you let's go back to those first 5 years, and specifically around mentorship. And with the benefit of hindsight, what were some of the things that you felt like you could have been working on or putting yourself on sort of a different trajectory? You already commented a little bit, of course, hard work and digging yourself into the practice area. And just as a brief aside, you had a focus in finance and securities within law school, and now you've sort of continued that trajectory forward. Maybe you can speak a little bit about, it seems like at 5 points, you sort of have to decide about whether or not you want to sort of like stay. You ended up doing it. So maybe you can guide a little bit in terms of how do you make that gut decision about continuing or not. But coming back just generally, the first 5 years with hindsight, what were some of the things that you felt the soft skills. I don't like to use that because I think soft skills are actually hard skills these days. What kind of things were you focusing on that inevitably led you on your path to where you're at today?
Yeah, so I think internal networking at law firms, especially at
Mm,
big law firms, is highly underrated. Getting to know partners, in your office, in other offices, to the extent you can get to know the folks who are in leadership at your firm, but also others who are at your group, at your level, getting to know them, build trust, build relationships, because you never know where those folks are going to end up, whether they're going to stay or go to other places, right? And, as a corollary to that, I think I did a pretty good job of the internal networking,
mm,
certainly as much as I could till it blew up and became a much bigger place.
right.
But what I didn't do as good a job of was keeping track of my law school network. I kind
Okay.
of lost track of most of the people I went to law school with. In
Mm,
hindsight, that was probably a mistake. I think
mm,
I think people these days are a lot better at it. There's LinkedIn.
sure.
LinkedIn is a great way to do it. There's WhatsApp, there's chat groups, and we didn't have that option. But I do think that networking with other lawyers at your level
Mm,
is an underrated use of time for junior lawyers. Yes, you have
okay.
to put the work in, you have to put the hours in, but in terms of both internal networking, external networking in your community, going to client events, going to industry events, going to conferences, some firms like ours are really good at pulling, I would say, not pushing, but
Mm,
pulling associates along to these things with us, right?
mm,
Some actively push them away from it and go, no, you don't need to
sure.
worry about that, right? Some are kind of in the middle. I feel like actively developing your network, whether it's internal, external with clients, external with other lawyers, other people in your space, getting to know the lawyers that you're working opposite. If you're
Mm,
working against the same lawyer on a bunch of deals, go grab coffee with them, see how their
yeah.
experience has been.
Mm,
Building relationships with other lawyers is frankly critical, right? Because
mm,
especially later in your career, yes, you want to build relationships with the business folks that clients whom you work, if you're in a transactions practice.
mm,
But at the end of the day, the general counsel has a large, as it should be, role in selecting what lawyers businesses use. And it doesn't matter what type of businesses. It doesn't matter if you're a company, a bank, an investment bank, a private fund, an
mm,
insurance company, whether you do fintech or digital assets. It makes no difference. Your general counsel is going to have a rightly, I don't want to say oversized because that implies it's not the right amount, a large influence over who they hire to work with the business, even if the business unit likes them. And so,
mm,
you're becoming adept at networking with other lawyers, and not just networking, but truly building relationships, being helpful to
sure.
them, whether it's writing articles together or being there to answer a question or making introductions, whether that's in-person introductions or email introductions. Building a network is an underrated skill. I feel
Mm,
like there's been a lot more focus on that lately, but I still think it's underrated compared to where it should
okay.
be.
Got you. Okay, underrated. We're sort of getting to Matt's takes. Number two, one, silly serious, keep it all in perspective. Number two, overemphasize the idea of network. We'll get to that. Let's talk about just really quickly in the first 5 years, focusing on practice areas and sort of doubling down on your practice area. Now, you decided to double down on life sciences and just the general equity markets. How did you, when at that inflection point in 5 years, how did you think about making the decision around whether or not you should continue with that?
Yeah, so I worked on a broader range of corporate transactions my first few years,
Mm,
partially because of market conditions, because the market kind of dove in
mm,
2001,
yeah.
um, partially because of the firm becoming part of a bigger firm like DLA Piper,
Hmm.
partially because of relationships that I built. I ended up focusing on working with the lenders in that space rather than the equity players or the companies, right?
Mm,
There was a bunch of work there when I started. I got introduced to people. I kind of liked the idea of working with banks and with at the time not as many, but private credit funds who were
hmm.
financing companies to these creative structures. Um, it's a repetitive business because you deal with the same people and clients all over again. And I just ended up focusing on that area. I do think, however, the broad range of skills, understanding the corporate side, venture capital transactions, private equity transactions, the M&A market, has helped me, you know, be an expert in that space because I understand the underlying transactions that are around them. So it really depends on who you are and what you do. If you end up becoming a tax lawyer, you're going to zero in on tax very quickly. Now, you may have gotten an LLM and already known that, right? If you're going to be a corporate lawyer, you probably don't know off the bat whether you're going to do M&A or you're going to do venture capital or you're going to do private equity or public company work. You might dabble in a bunch of them as an associate and figure out which of them speaks to you or which of them seems to fit your skill set best, or which of them you might find a client that you like. Litigation is a whole other example, right? Where you might do a broad range of litigation as a junior lawyer and then focus in on one or two particular areas. It may be one case or one deal. I think for every person that path it's not linear, and for every person they decide differently, right?
Okay. That's
why I say for that first 5 years, you really should keep your aperture pretty wide open in terms of the types of work you're willing to look at, the types of skills you're willing to build. Because I think that's really the period of time when you decide what kind of lawyer you are and who you want to be, right? There are people here that I know. I mean, the local head of our corporate group here started as a litigator and did that for, 4 or 6 years before he decided, you know what, this isn't for me. I want to switch and dial it back and become a corporate lawyer. Now he's running the corporate group here. It's never too late, right? Which is why I think broad aperture at the beginning, both for skill sets, different kinds of work, who you meet with, how you think about the law, what you're willing to work on, soft skills that you're willing to develop.
Sure.
It's important to kind of be a sponge those first 5 years, really, and really absorb in as much as you can. After that, you can kind of squeeze a little and squeeze out the excess juice, right? The longer you practice, the more you know, the more you can go, nah, I don't want to deal with that piece, right? So for me, for instance, my first 5 years, I did not only did I do company side work and investor side work and banks and funds, right? Once I even just started to focus on the finance piece, I did borrower side, i.e. working for the company, and lender side, right? As I kind of refined my practice those next 5 years, I squeezed out the borrower side completely. I only do lender side work. I have now for almost 15 years only done work on the lender side. I almost never do work on the company side, right? That was a further refinement, right? That being said, the types of lender side work that I do have yet expanded again over the years, right? Whereas I did a bunch of stuff at the beginning, then I really focused in on the venture and growth stage, focused on technology and healthcare companies. In the last, say, 5 or 10 years, I've added fintech to the portfolio. That didn't even exist when I started. Fintech didn't even exist, right? I've developed a somewhat of a specialty in our space exploration practice, lending money to companies that build rocket ships. Is it my only expertise? No, but it's it's different than what it was in the beginning, right? Working in that space. AI is another space where, I've worked with a bunch of different lenders lending money to companies who are in the AI space. There's a whole other host of issues. So I think that, when I talk to people in terms of, I love the word aperture. I've said it like 5 times, but I really think it's very apt. It's how much light the camera lets in. It's what you're willing to let in. You need a really wide one when you first start. Then I think in your next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, you kind of narrow it down a bit. You become an expert in something, you really focus in on an area. But then once you make partner at a firm and you've been there for a while, you tend to open it back up again, right? And your skill set starts to re-expand. That now that you're an expert in one area, it's almost like playing different instruments, right? Like you really go, okay, I'm going to focus on guitar, and then you go, okay, after the first 5 years, I'm going to really focus on jazz guitar. I'm going to be a jazz guitar.
I was going to go with jazz guitar. Everybody always focuses on.
But then once you become this really accomplished jazz guitarist, maybe you sit in, with a different kind of band, and you start, you delve into classical music, you delve into funk or whatever. You kind of open it back up again. So I think it's apt for different types of skill sets. And I think lawyers would be wise to, gain some more of that knowledge from people in other industries and in other areas.
I hear you. Okay, I'm not going to gloss over that you're helping with lending into rocket ships, and I know you're a surfer. So I'm hoping my favorite Marvel character is Silver Surfer. So I'm hoping for a surfboard that somehow can get us to different galaxies. So if you could figure out that funding, that would be incredible.
If someone builds that, one of my clients will fund it, I'm sure.
Oh my God, incredible! That would be incredible. Let me just ask you. Yes. Let me ask you, because you just went pretty deep in terms of the sort of practice level side and on the substantive side. Let me just ask you a flip side of this so I can synthesize the relationship and networking side of it. How important is, of course, everything's important, but for purposes of doubling down, and even let's say you want to get into a partner track and you really want to double down on this, how important is the idea of relationships, sort of the type of relationships that you've been able to sort of build in those first 5 to 10 years? How important is the relationship dynamic for purposes of just straight up career growth in the partner track, in the practice leader innovation track versus the substantive balance? Everything, of course, is important, but I'm trying to sort of gauge how important it is. Wow, I can see myself really developing incredibly strong relationships. Myself, I transitioned my practice from maritime litigation to technology companies. And, it was a huge jump for myself. And that's because I knew that I could just see myself networking and being and developing closer relationships with high technology companies over that period of time. So yeah, that's kind of like the question. Should you be motivated by the substantive work or with the idea of just broad general ecosystem?
The substantive work is the minimum ante.
Right.
Okay. In order to make partner at a good law firm and really be successful in this industry, you got to be able to do the work. You know what I mean? It's like the guitar player analogy. You got to have the chops. You don't have the chops, that's a minimum ante. That just having the chops might be enough to get you to partnership at a big law firm. You know what I mean? That might be enough in and of itself. Internal networking, relationship building, internally. Sure. That might be enough to get you over the hump. Once you've made partner at a firm and people know you have sort of the minimum chops, right? If you want to get to rainmaker status or someone who builds a big book of business or has lots of clients or is someone that is looked at as a leader in their industry or, some of these other great things that people will aspire to once they make partner, or you want to be in leadership at a law firm. We didn't get to that, that I kind of backed into.
Sure.
I think relationship building is the building block for that sort of like next jump, right? You don't have to do it in the first 10 years, but if you don't start early, it's going to be hard to learn later. Yeah. And, that's to say, without hesitation, there are partners at law firms, including ours. There are people who are in great in-house roles at companies, people who have great practices, who are excellent practitioners of the law, but don't have that next skill set for either leadership or development of business. And that's okay, right? There are excellent lawyers who just crank away. The question is, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? How do you want your career to go?
Right.
That's up to each individual person. So I think one is a minimum ante. Like you got to put the work in. You got to have the skill set. If you're not good, you're not going to last very long. Even if you fool someone into making you partner, right? You got to have the skill set. The other is sort of like once you've hit that minimum ante, how much relationship building you've been building along the way will determine how high you go. You can start building it later. It's harder, but I recommend building it earlier. So that way, let me put it this way. Relationship building is never going to hurt. It's never going to hurt.
Sure.
There's no downside to it, right?
Yeah.
There's only upside.
Like sriracha. It can only help with everything.
Like sriracha, right? I like Cholula better, but yeah, whatever your sauce is.
whatever your sauce is. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Let's jump into partnership. So you come into your partner track around 2010, 2017. What's it like to be a partner in the 2010s and within DLA, of course, but just in general, just sort of place us a little bit within the legal industry at this point in time. I would say it was, take us there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was an interesting time. I think the legal practice was more commoditized then, and people were trying to grow for growth's sake. So we were clearly a part of that as one of the larger firms. Grow both domestically and internationally. We were, look, I hate even bringing this up because it's the worst tagline we've ever had. Our tagline at the time was everything matters. And the reality is everything doesn't matter, right? Because if everything matters, nothing matters.
Right.
But at the time in the industry, it wasn't bad for the time because at the time, I think what we were trying to say is, look, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever client you are, whatever your needs, we are there for you, right? We're huge. We're the big law firm. We can cover you top to bottom, right? And I think that the industry was in a big period of consolidation, just trying to acquire, work on a pie that wasn't growing nearly as fast as it's growing now. I don't think lawyers were seen as quite as much a value add to the business as they are now. LinkedIn wasn't what it is now. Podcasts weren't what they are now. Thought leadership by lawyers wasn't what it is now. It was boring technical articles, not aimed at a business sense. You know, even though I was a business lawyer, I think I was viewed as less integral part to my client's business than we are now. And so, you know, a lot of it at that point was, for me at least, building relationships with existing clients. I had a handful of very large clients. I was kind of all in on them. They were keeping me busy. And so it was, you know, it was a lot of that. I think the industry, hopefully where we're going, and
yes,
the
right.
industry has significantly changed, right? I mean, lawyers are now considered a much more integral part of the business unit than they were then. In-house counsel, I believe, are much more involved now than they were 15 years ago in running the business.
Right.
Back then, I think they were seen as managing outside counsel was the main job of an in-house counsel. Whereas now it's a really much more integral part of the business unit. And so I think we as lawyers, as partners, you're expected to have a much greater level of business acumen and understanding for the business than maybe you were 10 or 15 years ago. We're thinking much more strategically and frankly, treating the law firm as a business enterprise in and of itself, right?
Yes.
We're looking much more at metrics other than just how many hours did you bill? And even maybe what is your billing rate, right?
Yes,
looking at much more advanced metrics. There was an article that came out on law.com just the other day.
I think I know where you're going about relative.
Well, it was about the baseball. It was about the analysis of baseball.
Right, yeah.
They didn't use. I'm shocked they didn't actually use the term in the article, but basically the concept of WAR or F-WAR and for baseball dorks, which is wins above replacement, basically saying how many extra wins above the replacement cost did this person give you? And so I think looking at law firm production on a WAR basis, right, or production above average or production above replacement, is it's almost brand new, right? I've been thinking about it that way for a while, but law firms are thinking about it that way, right? We have AI creeping in a way that we clearly never had before, right? We were just trying, as a young partner, I mean, you think this is crazy. Young partners were just trying to understand billing software technology and redlining back then was, and using track changes was sort of a new technology. I mean, it's crazy to even think about. When I became a partner, redlining was just sort of like being figured out. Whose are we redlining to? We're redlining to yours or to ours? Whose changes are these in track changes? What's in the bubbles? I mean, it was in nascent stages, right? There was no LinkedIn. There was no social media related to this stuff. If you wanted to publish an article, you had to get it published, like in a magazine or whatever. It's just a very different time. So people are using, I think lawyers now are using different skill sets. They're using different skills. Actual skills within the set, you know, that didn't even exist before. There's a whole it was a much darker time electronically. There just wasn't as much electronic connection, you know, than there is now. So I think it's just the landscape's just changed pretty radically, right?
Yes.
And you have to evolve with it.
Yes. Okay, so let's so much to say about partners. I only have you for a limited period of time, so I want to be respectful. Let's jump into, from there you sort of head into head of venture, growth finance, of course, and sort of move into, I would say, an industry focus in some sense, and then just sort of the practice area or the industry group, however you want to talk about it. This has, I think, been one of the biggest innovations, and in a way, it sort of consolidates everything that you just talked about in partner. A lot of things coming together, the integral nature, the rise of general counsel, sort of like, the specialization within it, let's just say the ease of connectivity of relationship building, and all of that sort of coming together. And of course, just the strategy of industry groups and kind of going deeper versus sort of trying to go broad. Is that a lot of what was happening? I mean, is that how, and then as the head of sort of like venture, is that how you were sort of thinking about it? I was just, the last side of this, I was talking to somebody the other day, and she was describing how way back in the 80s or 90s, she was working for some partner, and he would just say, he ran the insurance group, And at the time, everybody was saying, well, what practice area? And he would just say, well, it's just insurance. We just do insurance. We do what insurance needs. Yes, exactly. And back then it was like seeing like an ostrich ride a skateboard or something. But today it's almost within many industry groups / practice areas, it's kind of like the formulating structure of how a lot of people are thinking about it. So yeah, can you take us into what was your new mandate as sort of head of venture, and were some of these ideas flowing through that period of time?
Look, it still was a small industry. It's grown a lot in the last 5 years and changed a lot with SVB kind of blowing up and reconstituting this year. At the time, the idea of lending money to companies that didn't have real hard collateral was still growing, right, as a complement to the venture capital industry. And so, yes, I joined at an interesting time. I do think that, advances in technology and in healthcare and life sciences and the related industries all sort of propped up the cycle of venture capital investment, which led to the development of this very specific lending space. That being said, over the years, it's taken on a lot of flavors, right? There were periods of time where it was more of an asset-based lending structure to technology and healthcare companies. Then there were periods of time where it was just pure growth capital, right? Straight up writing checks, based on future growth. There have been times when there was a much stronger private equity-backed piece, and there were a lot of sponsor deals going on. So I think that it has been, I kind of followed along with the trend of what was happening in the industry. And it's kind of like you said, I kind of developed an expertise in lending money to these companies and representing lenders in the space. And over the years, what has been busy in that space has taken on new and different flavors. So I do think having an industry focus, like insurance, that's not the one I'm in, but having a focus on a specific industry, marketing to that industry, having industry expertise, coupled with some pretty solid skills for how to do lending deals to companies, that don't have real estate assets, has enabled the practice to sort of evolve over the years. And it has. I mean, look, private credit has come on to be a really significant piece of the industry in the last 5 years that it wasn't in prior years. But at the same time, more banks than ever are interested in this space and doing deals in the space. So it's become, there's more people, there are more players in the space now than there ever have been. I couldn't have predicted that, but that's where it went. So I think that comes back around to work on the stuff you're interested in, become an industry, become well-known in your industry by doing really good work and networking, do thought leadership, stay on the cutting edge of technology and what's happening, and expect that your practice will evolve over the years. Your practice will evolve no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah. Let's start to wrap up and bring you home a little bit. We're sort of we've brought from there from after the head of venture, you went into U.S. finance practice group leader. For somebody who's a partner right now, thinking about moving into sort of a practice group, an industry group leadership, what's the change that needs to happen internally? Of course, you're in some sense you're moving from. Of course, you're just a business of one to a business of many. But how did you sort of conceptualize some of the change about? Well, of course, you're managing people, you're directing people, you're leading people. You have a market focus, all the rest of it. What were some of the biggest changes that you sort of had to make? And then we're going to go for some of your hot takes at the end and some of the big things. Looking back after we've walked through your entire path, we're going to look back and take a look at some of the big. But yeah, answer this question right here about some of the biggest changes you had to make at that point.
Yeah, I mean, biggest changes for sure are. Well, in your own personal practice, you need to dish off more work and responsibility. So clients I had been working with for a long time, there was no way I was going to continue personally servicing all of them day to day, deal to deal, right? So I'm less involved than I was, even though still involved on a bunch of stuff, less involved than I was. That's hard after practicing for so many years, to consciously go, hey, you're going to have to take a step back on the day to day management or document to document management on some of the work. At the same time, you when you're doing deals, you sort of like in your head go, okay, I'm going to work on this, then I'm going to knock this out, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to knock this out. And you have clients sometimes that are doing calls and whatnot. when you're in middle management at a huge law firm like mine, which I am, I mean, I say that not in a bad way, right? I'm running a group, but I've got a boss I report to. He's got a boss he reports to, right? There's a chain of command where decisions get made and then filtered down, and then I make certain ones. You really have to manage up and down in a way,
right.
in an effective way to be effective for the business. And in doing that, you often lose control of your schedule a lot. Because you have to sort of, there are meetings that get scheduled that you have zero control over. And yes, I know it's the same with clients, but it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? Because it's the kind of thing where you have to just adjust your mindset, right? Every day is like a panoply of different meetings, necessities, requirements. I mean, I got a phone call this morning about a personnel change that's happening at our firm that necessitated me spending a bunch of time talking to a bunch of people about different things that I had no idea was going to happen, right? Like the don't panic factor.
Right. I was going to bring this in, of course.
Right.
Yes,
so I mean, you know, all honesty, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. You know, the longer I do this, the less qualified I will get to go back to not doing it, right? And so that's a little bit scary. You know, I've really had to buy in. I mean, and doing it at, 48 years old, I'm not like at the tail end of a career. I'm doing it at the point in a career where, if in 3 or 5 years they decide, hey, Matt, thank you for all of your help. I appreciate everything you've done. I'm spending a lot more time on not legal work, right? On business development, on structure it here at the firm, on helping build other people's practices that aren't mine. It's really a shift to a we mindset.
Right.
That is, it's really hard because many partners, for better or for worse, are 99% focused on them and their practice.
Right.
And, they're probably right to do that most of the time. That being said, when you want to optimize for a firm, or for a business, you really have to get out of that mindset. It just doesn't work to optimize it for a business. And when you're managing a bunch of people who are in an I mindset, trying to convince them to be in a we mindset, it's a major challenge. It's a bigger challenge than trying to keep clients happy and juggle all the balls. It's a totally different set of challenges, And so if you had asked me, be honest, if you had asked me 5 years ago, do you ever see yourself going in-house to a company? I would have been like, nah, big law for life. There's no way.
Sure.
I don't know, now having done this for 2 years, having been part of running a business, I'm not looking to jump off and go in-house. But I do think that, if after 5 or 10 years here, there was a next place to go, it might be helping run an even larger than this business, right? And so I think it's just a whole leadership at a law firm is a whole different skill set than practicing leadership, right? Leading lawyers is a totally different skill set, totally different. And I had to kind of start at the beginning, right? I wasn't good at this on day one. I kind of sucked at it, to be honest. I kind of faked my way through it. I think if you would ask the folks who are in more senior leadership, I'm much more effective now than I was 2 years ago because I didn't have the training for it. I kind of just learned on the job, And so I think that's an interesting part of the industry too,
Of course.
Leadership and culture. I think culture is set by leaders in law firms these days. I don't know how it is in other industries, but I think especially in law firms where partners are the firm, the culture is set by the leader, the people who are chosen to lead it. So I feel very grateful to be in this spot, but in some way there's a lot of imposter syndrome, in having been really good at something for a long time, spending all day being pretty good at something to spending most of the day doing something you have no idea how to do.
Yeah. I only have you for a couple more minutes, and I need to ask before we reflect. And I love this last little barrage that we went through. I have to have you back maybe on the transition from practicing to leadership at some point in time. I'll have you back onto the podcast to talk about this. But I want to talk about LinkedIn. This is how you and I've met, of course, and you're a user. You seem to be an advocate, and moreover than that, I would say that your posts range from inspirational to quoting Ferris Bueller to bringing in sort of like your personal life and really sort of reflecting and being vulnerable on the entire platform. How have you sort of thought about sort of I don't want to say social media, because I think at the end of the day, what this really comes down to is connecting with people and using sort of the technology and platforms that's available. But how did you sort of start to reconcile? We're not saying anything, lawyers don't use LinkedIn most of the time for most of its effectiveness, and I'm a huge advocate. It's been able to do a lot of things, but then there's getting on there, using it, and then different gradations. Can you talk to us a mini
Yeah.
journey within the larger of that and how you've sort of conceptualized that for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned it briefly. During COVID, I became involved. I helped co-found this thing called the Legal Mentor Network.
Right.
The Legal Mentor Network was born out of a LinkedIn post by my co-founder, Brian Potts, who posted a picture of his rejection letter from his current law firm hanging on the wall of his partner office in his law firm. And that post went absolutely viral. I don't know how they measure it, but it's one of the most viral LinkedIn posts of all time.
Shout out to Brian. I know Brian. Shout out to Brian.
Thousands of comments, hundreds, thousands of likes, maybe 100,000 of likes. I don't know how many people saw that thing. But, I know we only have a few minutes, but the short answer is that led me to Brian, which led us to found the Legal Mentor Network, which led me to mentor hundreds of young lawyers and law students. And I think from seeing what Brian's post was able to do, along with just an ascension in lawyers using LinkedIn during COVID, I was like, this is something special and different, and I should be more effective in using this. And at first, it just kind of was willy-nilly all over the place. I posted a bunch of stuff. I've posted a bunch about what happened in Israel last year. I've posted about mentoring. I've posted about my, weight loss and health journey. And what I've really realized in hearing feedback from literally hundreds of people about it is, I want to say this in the wrong way. You are like normalizing being a normal person and still succeeding as a lawyer, right? And it makes me feel good to know that like someone who's succeeded in big law and is in leadership in big law faces the same human issues that lots of us face. And I would say if I had an ethos for my LinkedIn posting, yes, it's great to put stuff out there. I certainly promote our firm and things that we're doing, but there's a main focus on humanizing in a positive way, the experience of a big law partner who's in leadership for the benefit of those who don't feel like they can do it, or for those who it helps them, right? And so trying to convey these messages of, mentoring is important in the industry, being good to yourself, understanding the goods and the bads, taking good days with bad ones, understanding that health and wellness is important, that you need to be responsible for your exercise and, alcohol and food consumption. And all of these things are really centered around, I don't say demystifying, but, making the industry more human for people who are getting into it, especially for young lawyers. And I think that's resonated too with clients. I'll have clients say, hey, I love what you're doing. It's great that, does it help me personally? Yes. I think branding as a lawyer is key, right? All we have is our brand. You have your firm brand, you have your personal brand. Sometimes they're intertwined with some people, but all you have is, your market brand as a lawyer. It's an intellectual property heavy business. You don't have works of art to point to show a gallery. So I think that, as a tool for personal branding, LinkedIn's number one right now. And, if you can use that to get across a message that resonates with you, that's positive for the industry. I think that's what I've tried to use it for.
Yeah.
What I'd encourage others to use it for.
And on behalf of all of those others, I say thank you for sort of putting that out there, normalizing as you had. And, at the end of the day, it's it cuts through in such a clear end call. I think that's sorely needed. So I think it's a wonderful message. All right. So we're getting to the last sort of lightning round here. Everything I've walked you through your hero's journey. We've gone all the way to 2024. What kind of big takes, big sort of on reflection of all of this time that we've been able to sit down, what are 3 or 4 things that you think with the benefit of hindsight, sitting where you're at today, and then looking forward, this is the most important thing, looking forward to where the industry is going, what sort of guidance would you give somebody who was just graduating today, entering his or her last year or their last year? Yeah. How would you mentor them in that capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell them, keep your mind and eyes open, learn as much as you can with the opportunities that you've been given. Gain as much knowledge and wisdom as you can, in your first 5 years of practice. Build as many relationships as you can, be as helpful as you can, develop good habits, because a lot of it is about forming habits, in terms of entering your time, when you work out, meal planning, whatever it is you need to do, gym, whatever. Prioritize the things that are important to you. I had this conversation with a junior associate of mine yesterday who was like, I want to do this long haul, but I don't know right now. It feels like a lot. And I said to her, like, look, you're like about to be like a third year. You're in the toughest slug of it, right? You're right in the middle of the first like 5 years. Like, don't give up on yourself, and the practice. It's going to be, commit yourself in your brain to a 5-year plan. Have a 5-year plan. Have it include all of the things, envision what you want, but know that a lot of it's going to include hard work and maybe some failure and having to figure that out. Use the tools that are around you. Embrace the technology that your firm has. Embrace social media, however you feel best using it. Embrace doing thought leadership. Embrace doing pro bono work. These are not mysteries. These are all things that, they're out there. It's really figuring out how to find a way to prioritize the things that matter to you. But you got to get that base knowledge of practice, right? At the end of the day, nothing will replace hard work, dedication, time, energy, commitment to the practice of law. You have to develop that as the absolute minimum entity. All those other things you need to figure out at what level you want to do them, but get ready in your mind. The first 5 years can be tough. It's gonna be a lot. It might not even get that much easier, but you will get used to it. It's like someone who wants to learn how to run a marathon. If you want to learn a marathon and you're judging, can I run a marathon by day one of training, never having run before? No, you're going to go out and run 3 miles and puke and be like, there's no way I could run, 26 miles. You have to build up the skill slowly. You have to have a training plan. You got to have a mentor. You got to be smart about it. You got to ask others in the industry, how did they do it? You really have to be much smarter about it than associates were at my age. And, when I came out in 2001, you could just work hard and it would figure itself out. You have to be a lot more proactive these days. Use the tools that are available to you. Find a mentor, go to the Legal Mentor Network, find 2 mentors. Constantly ask for feedback, be proactive, go to meet everybody you can. It's simple, but it takes a lot. It's a lot of effort and energy. But worth it.
Are you, you sort of said, you bullish on this industry moving forward next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I'm very bullish on the legal industry. I mean, I think it's, there are going to be tools that replace some tasks that lawyers do, but those are mostly commoditized tasks that a firm like ours doesn't do anyway, or we're going to figure out a way to use technology to do them more effectively. The industry is definitely changing. You want to be in industries that are on the cutting edge. And if you're not, you might be left behind. So for young lawyers, it's not rocket science. Some of it is, but get out there and figure out what's happening in your industry. Use the tools available to you. Do some research. Get online. Totally. Go to industry events. Talk to professors. Go talk to young lawyers. Figure out who's busy and who's not. Where the money is. Read the news. Follow the news. Read news articles. Go to Bloomberg. Follow the legal industry publications. Get proactive on it all.
To end, I'll just say, something I think you and I both share some wisdom. A gentleman named Ferris Bueller says, life moves pretty fast, right? If you don't stop and look around, you might just pass you by, right? I think that's truer than ever before. You could just miss it. Totally. Matt, thank you so much for sitting down on the podcast, sharing the wisdom,
it's my pleasure.
Reflecting with me. It's been a whole lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank
anything that we should be looking out for in the next couple of months before the end of the year? You're going to be any place? Anybody want to meet you IRL? Any place?
I'm all over the place. I'll be in New York 3 or 4 times. I'm going to DC, Toronto, Chicago. So if anybody wants to reach out, you can always reach out and meet me. I'll be in San Francisco this week. So, if there's anyone in the industry who wants to chat, young lawyers who want to chat, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to.
Right. Amazing. All right,
Thank you.
everybody. Well, this was This Legal Life with Matt Schwartz. Thank you so much, Matt. And thanks everybody else. If you like this, please like, subscribe, use the algorithm, all of that. That's why it's there for, to connect us and let us know. And we will be back very, very soon. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Cheers.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
one. Bye.
All right. Thanks.